Hi and welcome to this online seminar called Lockdown and Beyond, Becoming Carriers of Peace. It's amazing how quickly our worlds can change. I'm sure the majority of you did not have lockdown in your plans for 2020. Events, holidays and big ideas being put to one side as COVID-19 spread across our country and the rest of the world. This pandemic has probably intensified a lot of fears and issues that we were already facing, while also posing fresh challenges that we were not expecting. Last week I found myself becoming quite ill, and as time elapsed I became more nervous about what I could be carrying, so I moved quickly to get a COVID test, which thankfully was negative. But it dawned on me that what I catch and carry is very important. It affects everyone around me. So I want to talk about lockdown and beyond and how we can become carriers of peace. As I've said, our worlds can change quickly. My wife and I have been on a long journey of starting a family. We went through many years of infertility, IVF, and even losing a child during pregnancy, which was very painful. I genuinely believed for many years that I would never be called dad. Time moved forward and we embarked on the adventure of adopting a child. And around 18 months later, we were approved and became matched with a beautiful little Welsh boy, which is dear to my heart and to my heritage. We were in the middle of the transition with foster parents, and around the third week of March 2020, we spoke to our social workers and the message was really clear. You may need to move quickly. London could well go into lockdown and we don't want you to be separated from your new son. Well, it was quick. The next morning, quite ahead of time, we all jumped into the car and took our son to London. It was a journey for him from a Welsh village to a strange new city. Our first experience of being together would be in lockdown. And I want to take the next 15 minutes to look at two scenarios in the Bible where the Jewish people were locked down. One abroad in Babylon and the other at home in Israel. In each one, the Bible speaks of a roadmap in how we can be carriers of peace in a present and post-lockdown environment. So let's look at scenario one. That's in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29. It's a very interesting scenario because we see people moved into slavery from one place to another. It's a pattern that was repeated throughout the scriptures. Human trafficking is not new and has and continues to be a scourge on our world through the ages. And I've been amazed over the years how we have taken some scriptures completely out of their context. Let's take our example in Jeremiah 29, verse 11, and that says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you future and a hope." Good plans, full of a hope and future. Have you ever been quoted this scripture? I can hear some of you saying yes. I've often found it on fridge magnets or on the back of cars. But this was not an instruction to say all is going to be fine, but a challenging encouragement that would be hard to accept. It comes after a number of different instructions that Jeremiah gives to the people as they seek to deal with the situation they find themselves in. To be honest, I'm not sure how I would cope. Being separated from family over the last 3 or 4 months was hard, but there was the phone and there was FaceTime. Imagine being in a strange land, a dark city that was hostile to you, not knowing whether you would see those you loved again, whether you would go back to the sights and the smells and the landscape of home. I'd want to be looking for comfort, even if there was an element of sugarcoating involved. I'd want to hang on to something. Yet Jeremiah, the upbeat prophet that he is, tells the people no. You aren't going anywhere just yet. Lockdown is not easing for you. You aren't leaving Babylon for Jerusalem. Instead, you are going to be Jerusalem in Babylon. When we take a deeper dive at the meaning of the names of the two cities, it becomes really fascinating. Jerusalem, literally meaning the city of peace, and Babylon in Hebrew, meaning confusion. So, in essence, the people are being called to become peace in confusion. What an incredible challenge. How do you live like this? Well, Jeremiah describes what carriers of peace look like in the middle of confusion during verses 5 through 7. And he says this: be present where you are, in your neighborhood. Build homes and stay there. Plant gardens and produce fruit. Invest where you are, in the people around you. Multiply and advance. Do not dwindle away. Work for peace and prosperity in your area. Be for it and not against it. Actually pray for it. Why? Because our fortunes are linked with the fortunes of the city. Its welfare will determine ours. It's interesting because I was always told growing up to come out of Babylon and be separate. But actually, the carriers of peace are at the very heart of Babylon. And it's really key, verse 8. In all of that, don't listen to people who tell you what you want to hear. If you look for me wholeheartedly, it says in verse 13, you will find me. It really is about being prayerful, present, and peaceful. But as we jump into scenario number 2, we will realize that even when God comes in person as the major carrier or Prince of Peace, he and it may not necessarily be found. Let's jump into the final scenario number 2 in Matthew 5, lockdown at home. Matthew 5 verse 9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." You know, we cannot read anything between Matthew chapters 5 and 7 in isolation. The Sermon on the Mount is one of the most radical models of living that has ever been taught. So much so that it shaped people who didn't even claim to be Christians, like Gandhi. This pinnacle text of Jesus' teaching, a manifesto for God's alternative society, is, in the words of Pope Benedict XVI, Matthew putting together a picture of Jesus as the new Moses. Christ is recapitulating and adding depth to the commandments, but he does not abolish them. His command to be peacemakers within this sermon is set up to fulfill and accomplish the instructions and prophecy of Jeremiah that we just read in chapter 29. He enforces this in verse 17 of Matthew 5. Don't misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writing of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose. It is important to know that the season of accomplishment through Christ comes again at a very difficult period for the people of Israel. This time, the people are locked down at home. Living in an occupied land comes with just a crazy amount of danger, none that I could possibly imagine. The closest I ever came was a visit to Cyprus and the ghost town of Famagusta. It had been evacuated when the Turkish army invaded in 1974. It was pretty much untouched to this particular day. As I peered over the hill above, the tourist guide told me that the Turkish army were in distance and wouldn't tolerate anyone stepping over the line. We were driven through an area of disputed land with soldiers either side of the roads. In my sheltered life, that was the closest I came to any form of danger or sight of occupation. Who can imagine living in your own land as a prisoner? This radical message that Jesus brings may have come as a bit of a shock to the people. Have you ever had your expectations dashed? Nikki, my wife, and I, we once booked on a holiday because of a ridiculously cheap offer. We didn't read the small print and wondered when we arrived why we were the only people without children. At dinner that first night, after the birdie song had been played twice and we had been greeted by a gorilla and a dinosaur, we realized this was a family hotel. Guess who booked the holiday? It was not what we expected. I think the reason Jesus was not accepted by many was due to the fact that he was not the kind of Messiah that people wanted. How would the crowd he was speaking to respond to his challenge of peace? I mean, you're sitting on this hillside listening to Jesus. Wouldn't you be wondering, is this guy serious? I mean, I've got enough problems as it is. I don't think I need to be blessed with all that. Does he know how much tax I pay? How my family have been mistreated? Is this what accomplishing Jeremiah 29 looks like? They all thought Jeremiah was crazy when he wrote that letter generations ago. I can imagine them declaring to each other, like our forefathers, how are we meant to feel when we are asked to pray for the people that oppress us? Isn't that asking us to do too much? You know, enemy love is way beyond what I can give. How would you or I feel? Blessed are the peacemakers. Now, the term peace, according to our dictionaries, is a state of harmony characterized by the lack of violent conflict, the absence of hostility. Peace also suggests the existence of healthy or newly healed relationships. This makes peace sound very passive to me, lack of, absence of. In my mind, peace or shalom is a pursuer. It is all-encompassing and has so many different elements to it. Ultimately, the wholeness of mind, body, soul, spirit, and our whole estate. Jehovah Shalom, God is our peace, comes in a person called Jesus. He speaks, saying, how blessed are you, or how happy and supremely blessed or fortunate are you when you seek out peace. The sense of being a neighbor and loving our enemies works right through this text. Miroslav Volf, he describes loving our neighbor as anyone who happens to be near us, and loving our enemy as anyone who wants to harm us. Well, how do we do that? I think we can see it in the rhythm and progression of the Beatitudes. They are not 8 random sayings. The first 4 deal with how God meets us, and the next 4 deals with how we meet others. When God meets us in our brokenness and in our sin, in our failure and confusion, we experience the grace of God at our lowest moments. It then becomes very hard to be judgmental with those at their lowest point. God meets us in the places we least expect. You see, this is Jerusalem in Babylon all over again. It is the beginning of accomplishing peace in confusion. If you had a chance at this moment to write some Beatitudes, who would you choose to bless? Blessed are the traffic wardens. Blessed are the noisy neighbours. Blessed are the peacemakers is not Jesus' way of saying, blessed are those people who help everybody get along. It is interesting that the next blessed group of people are the persecuted. As we pursue peace, we don't realize that it may actually cause some conflict. Some people are not ready for us to say you need to change to see peace break in. Are we often ready to hear that ourselves? Just like the people in the time of Jeremiah, some will want to hear what they want to hear, just like I sometimes want to hear what I want to hear. I'm sure that Jeremiah was not well received at first. His description of peace was to be present in conflict and confusion, not absent from it. To have met with God as Jerusalem in order to bring wholeness to Babylon. God's definition of peace was to send Jesus to be Emmanuel, present, God with us in the middle of darkness, in the middle of confusion, not absent from it. When we are present and building peace, it will challenge the status quo. It may not go down that well. Some people won't want peace and change. They will actively resist it. Now, it is not so strange As I've said, that the next beatitude mentions persecution. Jesus came as the Prince of Peace, and yet that isn't always what followed him. He is ultimately persecuted and killed. Peacekeeping aims to keep things as they are. We, as the people of God, are called to be peacemakers, not peacekeepers, to be proactive, not passive. So in all of my being, I have been met with the grace of God, the kind of love that casts out fear. We live in a world at the moment of two sides. Are you with them or us? What political divide do you belong to? What theological camp do you sit in? Are you with that group or this group? Are you for them or against us? Everything is being challenged right now. All the labeling systems that we have, all the hurtful prejudices and racism that still exist, and rightly so, that they are challenged and extinguished. How powerful it is to see people how God sees them. That is Jerusalem in Babylon. That is what Jesus is building upon and accomplishing. You know, in Joshua 5, we see the Israeli commander address the angel of the Lord and ask him if he was for them or for his enemies. And the reaction is quite surprising. One word: neither. So to conclude, what does being a carrier of peace look like? Be present where you are. Invest where you are. Multiply and advance. Do not dwindle away. Work for peace and prosperity in your area. Importantly, pray for the fortunes of your village, your town, your city. Its welfare will determine yours. And underline it all. Don't listen to people who tell you what you want to hear. That is really key. You know, Jesus accomplishes all of these things and pulls the pieces together through his sermon. It's so wide-ranging. He talks about salt and light, anger, conflict, making vows, revenge, judging others, loving your enemies, giving to the needy, prayer, money. But in a nutshell, it's about doing all these things from a certain posture. Meeting with God first before you meet others. In this current context, when the world seems so divided, I believe God is actively looking for peacemakers and liberators. People who will challenge, draw a line in the sand, go in the opposite spirit, meet others in the same way God has met with them. The Bible is clear about a way to live in and post-lockdown, in a new era as carriers of peace. Situations around us, well, they can change, but the word of the Lord remains.